Okay, so we're going to try this again. Here's part two. Didn't mean to close that out, but I did. And it is what it is. But anyway, back to caste. So in Hindu religion, ooh, make myself a little bit smaller here. That'll make things work. Okay, in Hindu religion, Hindus believe that there is one eternal and universal spirit called Brahma, and we are all a part of it. I am a part of it. That map back there is a part of it. So is that wall. So is this couch. So is this shirt. So are you. So are your parents. So are your friends. So is everything. Everything is a part of that. But within that, there's all sorts of little subgroups. So you have other gods and things like that. But within that are four basic types of people. Actually, five, but kind of four. At the top, you have Brahmins, and the Brahmins are priests and teachers. They are like the head of the body of Brahma, okay, which is here. Let me get this guy here. They are the head. And the reason they're head is because priests and teachers are supposed to hold all the knowledge. They are the head. And they are the topmost. That's the one you want to be. You're the most intellectual. You're the most intelligent, as teachers, of course, are. Duh. But that is the top. The arms of Brahma are the kshatriyas. They are the warriors, the rulers. They are the arms. They do the fighting and they do the manipulating and telling people what to do in terms of society. They mold and shape society and put it into its place. Whereas the Brahmins, they are the ones who think and sort of tell the arms what to do. The legs down here are your Vaishyas, your farmers, your traders, and your merchants. Interestingly enough, though, the Vaishyas are oftentimes some of the most wealthy people because they are merchants and they are like skilled workers. And so they could be like lawyers and doctors and that sort of thing. So just because you're a priest or a teacher doesn't necessarily mean you're rich, but in Hindu society it means you're the smartest. Doesn't necessarily mean you're rich. Be nice if teachers were the richest, but we're not. And then the feet are your shudras. Okay, they are the laborers, those people who do like the grunt work. And obviously they are kind of the lowest in Hindu society, but you need your feet because you know where you would get without your feet? Nowhere, because you'd be running around on bloody stumps and it'd be gross and people wouldn't like you and you'd get blood everywhere and nobody would invite you to their dinner parties because you'd be bloody foot stump guy and nobody likes that guy because it's gross and he's probably like screaming all the time because his nubs hurt. Now, in addition to this, we have a group of people called the Dalits. They are the outcasts. They are out of the caste system. That's where the term outcast comes from. And they are lowest of the low. Sometimes the way I teach this is if this is the body of Hinduism, the Dalits are like the poop. They are poop. Okay. They do all the jobs that nobody wants to do. They clean the streets. They change the latrines. Latrines is like your outhouse. So they clean other people's poop. They carry manure. In some places, you're not supposed to associate with outcasts at all. If you're like a casted Hindu and you are seen cavorting with a Dalit, that is beyond bad. Like you may have to take a bath. Like they are like unclean, gross people. It's like something you cannot do. You certainly can't marry them. You can't be friends with them. You're in some cities and some villages in India, in the traditional sense, if you were an outcast coming into the city, they may not let you even come in. Or if they do, you have to wear a bell so that everybody can hear you coming. Be like, oh yeah, here comes that outcast. Make sure you don't touch him. In fact, don't even look at him. He may give you his germs just by looking at you. So Dalits, bad. They're outcasts. They're beyond low. But they can't ever do anything to get out of that position because that is their dharma. And they have to live that life with the idea that when they die, maybe they'll come back as something better. Maybe they'll come back as a Shudra. If they're really good, maybe they'll skip a level and become a Vaisya. But those are your four, kind of five major levels of caste. So what does this have to do with, what does this have to do with Islam and Hinduism? Well, as more and more Muslims migrated into India, we see Islam grew. And the way that they got in were either by because of economics, because they were merchants, or there were Muslim invasions. But with the growth of Muslims, we see sort of a need to amend Hinduism. So where do the Muslims fit into this? Well, we see the development of jatai, or subcastes. It was basically like a caste within a caste. So in the Vaisya caste, where you have all of these different trades, you may have doctors, may have lawyers, you may have sort of a subcaste of lawyers. Like that is that subcaste. And it's similar to like a workers guild, and a workers guild is kind of like a union, where you have a bunch of workers who get together and they sort of determine how much they should get paid. If they think one of them is getting screwed over, they'll all like go on strike and support themselves. And it's basically like a union, so to speak. But the caste system expanded from north to south because it was a way of conveniently organizing people. And it was promoted by temples and the education system and by society. People sort of maintain this, and they maintain this through marriages. If you were born into the Vaisya community, you were expected to marry somebody that was in the Vaisya community. And remember, India is a place with arranged marriages, still is to this day. And your parents are going to marry you to somebody who is a member of your caste. And you don't really have a choice in it. And a lot of people think arranged marriages are crazy, but they are the way of life. And there's actually a lot of benefits to it. You don't have to worry about dating. You don't have to worry about picking somebody to marry. And your family is already all about it, so you don't have to worry about your families not getting along. However, the whole love thing might kind of get pushed to the side. So if you're into that whole love stuff, arranged marriages might not be for you. But you don't live in India, so aren't you lucky? So in terms of religious developments during this time, we see Jainism and Buddhism really take a hit. Buddhism kind of gets displaced in a lot of ways by Islam. Turkish invasions, basically a lot of those kind of white Hun type people come in and they destroy holy sites and they destroy temples. Probably the most notable of which was the destruction of the library at Nalanda by Muslim forces in 1196. All of the Muslims living in this massive, is more of a university than it was a library, had to leave. They had to go somewhere else throughout the world. And 9 million books got burnt. That must have been a heck of a fire. But Hindu and Islamic traditions prevailed because the leaders at that time were predominantly Hindu and Islamic, and they were able to keep control of things. Whereas most of the temples that were Buddhist did just not really have the state support that they needed to maintain themselves in the face of such adversity. But we see Hinduism increase as more and more people sort of were able to personalize Hinduism. Though Hinduism is strict in terms of where you are in society, it's not too strict in terms of how you practice the actual religion and the way it works for you. Though there is this eternal universal spirit known as Brahma, the gods within that can be catered to what you believe as a person. Hinduism is often called hado-theistic, which means you sort of have a loose universal spirit and a bunch of other gods that all make up into that. One particular god is Vishnu, another one is Shiva, which we see here. This is the most common picture we see of Shiva. Shiva is a he. He is dancing in a ring of fire. He has multiple arms, one of which is like holding out a benevolence flame to show that he won't hurt you. He's also stomping on a little troll guy here who is supposed to represent ignorance and sort of stupidity. And that's the common thing we see. Shiva is also a preserver god, but also a destroyer god. And there's numerous other gods. I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with the god Ganesha, who is that elephant god who is supposed to be the god of removing obstacles. So it's similar to Greek gods in that there's so many different ones and they take on human characteristics. And depending where you're from, you may pray to a different god. India is a very variant culture. There's many, many different languages. People usually think everybody from India is the same, but not quite. And Hinduism definitely expands from the south to the north in terms of popularity. And in terms of philosophy, we see certain ideas emerge in the post-classical period. We see the ideas of Shankara, who is a Shiva devotee, and he was very much of the Platonic school, which is like Plato from Greece, and he was very much into analyzing things with logic and rationality, to try to explain things logically, kind of using like the scientific method to explain certain emotional devotions. However, later on in the 11th century, we see the emergence of the Brahmin philosopher Ramanuja, who basically said that Shankara's emphasis of logic is false because human beings lack the understanding that the gods have, and therefore we can never understand what they do, and any attempt to do so is fruitless and just full of folly and just going to make you miserable. Very similar to Al-Ghazali, who was the Islamic teacher, who kind of said the same thing, that you can't try to explain things logically. You're only going to make yourself miserable. You're better off just studying the Quran. So kind of the Hindu version of Al-Ghazali. And we'll see sort of this vacillation between worshiping sort of religious doctrine and religious text, as opposed to looking at sort of the way the world actually works through the scientific method and analysis of the world around us. We're going to see this take a huge role in Europe during the Renaissance, and a lot of conflict emerge as a result. But we see lots of people also converting to Islam. So this sort of complex nature between Islam and Hinduism just gets more and more complex during this period. By about 1500, about 25 million people had converted to Islam in India, about a quarter of the population. Reason being is that if you were a Dalit or an outcast, why wouldn't you convert to Islam? Islam doesn't really recognize a social class system. You can be a king, you can be a sultan, no matter what you were born, as long as you were lucky. But sort of in a tragic bit of irony, most Hindus who converted to Islam didn't really gain much in terms of their social standing, because people didn't really care. They were still seen as outcasts. Now they're just seen as outcasts trying to gain a position in life. But that sort of dirtiness associated with them is something they most of the time could not really shake or get rid of. And the Sufis were very, very, very very, very successful in terms of gaining people to converting into Islam. Remember, the Sufis were much more mystical. They weren't necessarily as focused on religious doctrine as they were about relationships with other people, in terms of showing mercy to the poor and disadvantaged. And because of their missionary work, were able to get a lot of converts. And they were able to sort of be flexible in terms of how they preached Islam with certain local traditions. And that's kind of where we get the Bhakti movement, where basically these people believe that both Hinduism and Islam could coexist. Remember, Hinduism believes in many, many gods. And certain thinkers like Guru Kabir basically taught that Shiva, Vishnu, and Allah were all manifestations of Brahma. And so basically Allah is just another god of Brahma. However, your more hardcore Muslims are basically going to say, no. There's only one God, and it's Allah. He's not a part of a whole network of gods. He is the only God, and that is that. So it wasn't quite as successful, but here we see an attempt, a fairly successful one in terms of attempts to merge Islam and Hinduism. Probably your most successful one, and it was pretty unsuccessful, which kind of shows how strict Islam can be. But we see how they tried to mix it. And Hinduism is a very adaptable religion in that regard. Still is to many degrees to this day. But we see Indian influence to a large degree in Southeast Asia, especially when you have all of these traders moving throughout India to Southeast Asia, to places like modern-day Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, those types of places. We see Indian ideas and traditions in kingship. For example, in certain places in Southeast Asia, they would call their kings Rajas, which comes from India. That means like a Hindu leader, so to speak. And we see elements of Hinduism as well as Buddhism travel, as well as their elements of literature, where within the Hindu and Buddhist traditions, we see a lot of sort of localized versions of the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads and other Hindu texts emerge. And we see symbols of the Buddha in various temples, as well as certain Hindu deities as well. However, the caste system did not gain a foothold like it did in India. Trying to build that rigid of a social structure when you kind of already have one in place is not very easy to do. Some might even classify that as impossible. So certain states of Southeast Asia include Funan, which started in the lower Mekong River, which is like modern day Vietnam. It emerged from the 1st to 6th century, and like many states, basically due to political infighting, it fell apart and was basically overtaken by people from Khmer, kind of like the Kingdom of Angkor, which is down here. Also during this time, we see the emergence of the kingdom of Srivijaya, which was more of a trading network, similar to the Chola kingdom in India, which is centered in Sumatra, which is basically an area in Indonesia/Malaysia. And again, it was a network of trading states. It wasn't really a land-based kingdom empire like we would think of it. We also saw emerge the kingdom of Angkor, and they built a series of temples in Cambodia, which still stand to this day. Everybody that I know has been to Cambodia has visited them, and apparently they're just amazing. Just totally magnificent, massive city-looking complexes, but abandoned in 1431, overtaken by jungles. But when the French eventually came to Cambodia and colonized it, they found them and they said, wow, these places are very nice, no? And they cleared the jungles and made it look nice for people to visit. And here we see a map of these places. So here we see Funan, kind of your more traditional land-based empire, and then Srivijaya, which controlled the trade of these various places, which traded with places like China, with Southeast Asia, and all the way to India. So the sort of Silk Road network was not necessarily just a road, it was also a water road, so to speak. And then in this map, we see the kingdoms of Angkor, which kind of usurped Funan. And then we also see the two smaller trading network empires of Singosari and Majapahit down here in Java. Basically, different versions of Srivijaya, which again was more of a trading network rather than a land-based kingdom. And we also see the arrival of Islam through trade. Again, the biggest way that Islam travels is through trade, not necessarily through conquest. When you have this central part of the world that is huge for trade, like the Middle East, and that area is heavily Muslim, you're going to see trade be the main conduit of cultural change. Because if you want to get in good with Muslim traders to get a favorable deal, what better way than to convert their religion? Now you have a common thing to talk about. You can talk about how great Allah is. Hey guys, how cool is that Allah guy? Man, I can't wait to go pray 5 times a day. That sort of thing. You can get that conversation going, and now you got a favorable business deal. Now you can buy a sweet mansion and maybe elephants, and let your kids ride on them and stuff. But also another big thing apart from just economic self-interest was Sufi activity. A lot of people took to the salvation message that Islam gave, this idea that you get to go to heaven and enjoy an eternal life of peace and happiness. That's really what it got going, and we see a lot of literature that expresses that. A lot of the Sufi literature sort of talks about that. When you have disadvantaged people reading this, or probably more likely hearing it because they didn't know how to read, about this sort of life of eternal happiness. But there is many people who were converted, but still certain Buddhist traditions remain. So it's still a very complex area culturally. You have Buddhists and Muslims sort of coexisting. And yes, there is still a lot of conflict to this day. For example, in Thailand, or actually in Myanmar, we have a lot of Buddhists and Muslims that still fight with some pretty ghastly bits of violence. People oftentimes think Buddhists are all peaceful and full of meditation and inner peace, but not always. Buddhists can be violent too. But the reason I show you this map is to show you the prevalence of Islamic activity. And still to this day, Indonesia is the world's most populated Muslim country. There are more Muslims that live in Indonesia than any other single country. A lot of people live in Indonesia, but a lot of people don't necessarily realize that Southeast Asia is a heavily Muslim community. Still to this day. They very, 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 very strict. In fact, if you go to Indonesia, trying to do things like drink alcohol might be pretty difficult in certain places because that is forbidden per Islamic tradition. Our last slide today is about Malacca, which is actually a bad word in Greek. Don't look it up. Don't do it. Don't look up Malacca in Greek. It's a bad word. Don't use it. But anyway, it was founded in the late 14th century by a rebellious prince from Sumatra. And the reason it's such a big deal is that it controls a strait for shipping. If you want to trade stuff from like the Philippines and that sort of thing up to India, it's way faster if you can go through the Straits of Malacca to get to India than having to like go all the way around here. I mean, you're talking like weeks, if not months of travel you would save. So if you go through here, that means you have to pay the price and basically pay certain people who control that strait certain taxes. Like they'll let you go through, but you got to pay some money. And if you don't, they basically take over your ship and take all your cargo and you get nothing. Still to this day, cities like Kuala Lumpur and Singapore, which is actually like a city state, make a ton of money because they control that trade. If you want to go through there, you have to pay them. You have to sort of dock your ships and pay them. So still to this day, huge shipping, and shipping is a way to make a lot of money then, and it's still a way to make a lot of money now. But controlling those trade routes was very, very much in their interest. And it was the key to kind of controlling the Indian Ocean basin at this time, and it was the key to stability within India at that time. Trade has a way of sort of keeping people calm because as long as people are making money, they're way less likely to want to fight. And of course, Islam kind of became the religion of trade, and just like that, religion spread. The Islamic religion spread to the Malaccan ruling class. So just like places like India, like the Middle East, like Northern Africa, because of trade and because of the message of Islam, they became Muslim places, and so did Malacca. If you made it to the end, good for you. Hopefully you learned something in this. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I believe I have comments activated for this. I'm sorry, my feline assistant didn't help me out. He's sleeping on the job because he's lazy and fat. Didn't hear it. Didn't hear it. He's totally passed out. But thank you guys, and I will see you in class. Take care, and you are amazing.